Aduachi implementation by Andrew.
Sam.
And Celia.
So in the assessment phase, what was missed by the EWB team, one thing was the political disagreements about the Igwe because there's a power struggle between them, which led to a lot of confusion between who was actually in charge, and there's just a lot of confusion in the EWB team about what to do, and that could have been avoided if in the assessment phase they took that into account and planned.
There were also a lot of errors with the stakeholders who were consulted. EWB probably wanted a wide spread of who they consulted to address the different members of the society and their needs. However, the people they ended up talking to were a much closer, higher end of the social hierarchy, due to consulting members with like specializations, and they also ended up not particularly being relevant because several of them would leave town for extended periods of time or have better infrastructure in their homes, which would change their need for water relative to the population as a whole.
One of the other important things to consider is the economic viability of any given plan or situation. Mainly, this looks like the money that's present, the money they expect to use for different phases of this project, as well as the money it would take to upkeep and make sure this project continues into the future.
Something else that was missed during the assessment phase was that the motivations of the members of the EWB team were very intrinsically and extrinsically related to their own personal experience instead of working for the community, and this clouded the overall why of the project.
So what impact on the project did a non-contextual assessment actually have here? And one of those things is pretty clearly that it didn't account for that level of involvement that the community should have. They didn't quite work with the community to make sure the community was, involved in the project as much as they should have been, because the community didn't feel like they owned this project and they didn't feel necessarily a respect or connection to this project, which definitely contributed to why it wasn't quite as successful as it could have been if they had gone in a different direction with that.
And in my opinion, something that contributed a lot to that was that when EWB engineers were designing their solution, they didn't take into account that this was not maintainable for the community, for regular people in the community, which led to people not really feeling like they owned it, because when it was broken, it wasn't their responsibility to fix it. They'd contact EWB to fix it, which kind of created a lack of ownership, and they felt like they weren't involved. And obviously, there's a big problem if they can't maintain something as critical as a water supply in the community.
Also, implementing the westernized standards to the project instead of taking into account, I think probably the standards of Aduachi, it made it difficult to kind of bridge the two together and have one concise goal for the project.
There were also kind of projected ideas of what the project should be from the EWB team onto the members when they talked with the water committee. And this kind of pushed their own narrative, which did not necessarily reflect the values that the stakeholders of Aduachi wanted to either express or have for the project as a whole. And this made the project kind of skewed in a direction it took.
So how can you apply contextual engineering to proceed to construction? Well, one way you can do that is use materials that are locally sourced, because that'll provide, some familiarity to the community so that they're comfortable with it and they can help, that would make it easier for them to understand how to use it and maintain it. And this would also lead to using materials that are by virtue probably more resilient in their local environment.
Yeah, one of those things, resources, and any project, one of those valuable resources, the people that are a part of it. And quite in this situation, if you apply that and you essentially work with the people that are what skills and understandings that they bring to the table, you can optimize them to create the best project that they will be able to work with, they'll understand, and they'll be able to repair and work with in the future.
It's also important to use contextual engineering to ensure that a solution meets success criteria. And with contextual engineering, you realize that the success criteria per stakeholder is different and can be vastly different in some cases. Here, I personally feel that the success criteria is fairly similar for both groups. However, there's a much more result-oriented focus by the Aduachi people versus a more technical value slash mechanical by the EWB team.
Kind of going back to what Liam said, it's important to understand the climate conditions because this will ensure the longevity of the materials that are used in the project.
What decisions or proposed plans should be revised to reflect the community context? It's important to address the communication structure, and this goes with the water committee. The water committee has an idea. It's important to communicate with people of the Ottawachi in a way that you address the people that need to be addressed, like groups, while still only talking to people in a way where it's not too much information. Has a team, the EWBE team does not get overwhelmed. And so the water committee, I feel, works as an idea. However, the people under the water committee needed to be reconsidered as the spread of the population of Ottawachi. It covered a far too small portion.
Another thing they should probably re-examine would be the use of the water tax collector, because as we all know, there was a problem with the person who was in charge of that or who was employed to do that would come back at the end of the day and claim they made no money, despite the fact that everyone needs water to survive. So they should probably reconsider using that and maybe find a better way to collect money to support the water in their community.
And the application, it's also important to have considerations for the longevity of the project. This kind of goes back into the success of the project. The project is not supposed to be a short-term solution. It's supposed to be a long-term solution, and as such, it should last a long time.
Additionally, again, money and materials are crucial and pinnacle for the success of this project in any regard, whether it's temporary or long. And so it's spending some time researching what materials are around and how those materials are used commonly in that area by those people who know how to use those materials, and therefore take that knowledge and that understanding, implement it into a design, would involve the community and involve their needs and understandings better.
I think another thing another decision that should be revised is the structure of the community meetings. I think instead of hosting community meetings, the EWB team should instead branch out into the community to receive more genuine opinions, ideas, and feedback.
Can the application of context after assessment still affect project outcome? How? It can change or adjust the perceived goal for stakeholders, especially those who are involved in construction. There was a big deal of ownership, and part of ownership is participating and kind of knowing like what the project is, and that was not done very clearly. People of Ottawachi generally just did not feel involved, and then as such, they did not really feel like they owned it.
Another point is that context is important throughout the entirety of the project to support the culture of Ottawachi.
Of course, one of the parts of a project like this is, even though the community will view it in one way and they'll view it as a way to get water and enhance one of their quality of life, people like engineers that boards will take a look at this project as a success-fail ratio and look at the analytics. And so past when the project will be technically completed, it's not over, because they're constantly monitoring the data, and they're constantly monitoring the success and how the project worked over time, as well as how it's constantly being interacted with, as well as understanding at what points in time things are breaking, what's breaking, how it's breaking, and how that can be fixed in the future.
And another point would be communicating with the community throughout the process of building their solution for real-time support. So, for example, as they're building it, they should routinely ask the community if everything is going to plan, if they're okay with everything, because there could come up things that just sort of communication differences that they didn't understand at the time. And then once they start going through with it, they start realizing that, whoa, I don't actually want it that way. And if they communicate with the community constantly throughout the building process, they can tell them before it becomes permanent and an issue.
And through these conscious thoughts, it's important to reconsider the decisions made in the assessment phase.